Welcome, everyone. I'm Noel Marshall with the Co-Creators Convergence. Thank you for joining us for World Unity Week. And I'm just really excited about our next guest, who happens to be a longtime friend, Eleanor LeCain. And I'm going to read her formal bio. Before I get there, I want to talk about Eleanor, her book, Breakthrough Solutions. Because as you all know, we are part of Barbara Marx Hubbard's legacy. And gee, Eleanor, you're certainly connected to Barbara Marx Hubbard and her sister Patricia and Daniel Ellsberg and, so many others. And in 2012, Bob and I went on a tour around the United States about Birth 2012. And what did we take with us? It was Eleanor's recently released book. And we are one of your salespeople. So here we go again, sister. So welcome, Eleanor.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, Noel.
Yeah, we go back. And actually, we were together last year on World Unity Week when you did a historic interview with Marianne Williamson.
Yes, that was a lot of fun. Thank you for making that opportunity possible.
Well, you bring so much to us, and that was a historic interview, and you can find it on, I think, on Eleanor's website as well as on the Co-Creators Convergence website. So let me tell you a little bit about Eleanor LeCain. She's a speaker, author, and advisor and policymaker who builds on decades, and I mean decades of experience and campaigns to show up practical pathways to building a new America and a new world. Her first book, Breakthrough Solutions, How to Improve Your Life and Change the World by Building on What Works. She manifested a foreword by the Dalai Lama. That was pretty amazing. It profiles game-changing social solutions that dramatically improves people's lives. Her second book, The Mayor's Guide to Accelerating Gender Equality, came from her bringing together mayors and women leaders to discuss an action agenda to improve conditions for women and girls. It was sent to every mayor in the United States. Eleanor advises policymakers and candidates at the local, state, and federal levels on issue and strategies. She served as a top policy advisor for a 2020 US presidential candidate. And in 2016, she was director of the She Wins, We Wins campaign to elect Hillary Clinton president and Democratic women to Congress. She helped elect many women to office at the local, state, and federal levels, including one of my favorite, Elizabeth Warren, to the US Senate. So Eleanor served in Massachusetts state government as Assistant Secretary of State. She was executive director of Blueprint 2000, leading strategic planning for the state government in all areas of policy. She advised the Kyoto Businessmen's Association in Japan on green business opportunities and the Japanese Parliament on policies to spur green business and jobs. She designed and led a leadership seminar in Kabul for the women of Afghanistan. She is the founder of Yale Women DC and an early member of Yale Women Council, guiding a global network of 55,000 female graduates of Yale. And in her spare time, Eleanor hosts a solution-oriented radio on gender equality, transformational leadership, pro-democracy movements, climate change, and more on PRN radio. And I'm going to put that down below. You'll be able to read that at www.prn.fm. Eleanor graduated from Yale College and Bolt Law School. She lives in DC with her husband and daughter. So I am so excited to again welcome you, Eleanor.
Thank you.
Your resume is amazing. And I think if anyone was paying attention, they know you do a lot of work in a lot of areas around the world, but in particular for women. So I'm just going to share, I'm going to give the title of your book and then ask you to kind of clue us in. So the title is Rising, the Women's Guide to Rebuilding Our Lives, Our Country, and Our World after the pandemic. So Eleanor, please tell us, what's in this book of goodness and wisdom and knowledge?
Thanks so much, Noel. I really appreciate that very warm welcome. Yes, well, this book is what it says, about rising, the women's guide to rebuilding our lives, our country, and our world after the pandemic. All of us really worldwide have just been through a very challenging year with the pandemic. We've had lots of challenges with health and finances. The upside is we have an opportunity to rethink what we're doing as individuals and as members of society. And we don't really want to go back to what was before. We can build back better. And this book shows how. I believe it's the time to be bold and to go for the transformation that's needed, because if we kept on the current path we had before the pandemic, it's leading to destruction. Too many people poor and too much destruction of the planet. So the book offers a bold and realistic blueprint for solving 4 of our most pressing problems, which are the crises in democracy, our economy, our health, and our climate. And it shows the pathway from where we are to where we want to be.
Well, let's expand a little bit further. You're focusing on women getting more involved in politics and government. Why is that such an important strategy to you?
Well, I would say we need women and men to make the changes that are needed. I'm particularly calling out women for a number of reasons. We had a lot of women stayed out of politics and government because they thought it was too toxic, too nasty. Their voice or vote didn't matter. But when Trump got elected in 2016, women really understood how dangerous that was. And we recognized that if we didn't get involved in politics and government, that bad things could and would happen. And in fact, that our very democracy is at risk. So women marched, women voted, women ran for office in record numbers. We got Trump out of office. We got some good women into office. So the question now is, what's next? And what's next is using our voice and our vote to make the changes needed in our countries and in the world. So this book is really a rallying cry for women and our male allies to use our voice, use our power, use our collective wisdom to really create and bring forth a new paradigm. We need a new America and a new world. And this book is a roadmap on how we can do that.
Wonderful. Now, so you're writing this book, and although it has an emphasis, and I know you were part of She Wins, We Win campaign in 2016, but who will get the most out of it? It's not just directed at women. I think you're kind of making that clear.
Right, exactly. And I believe in women and men in partnership. It's like flying on 2 wings. And for too long, the US and humanity has been trying to fly on 1 wing with the men in the lead so much, and we're about to crash. We need to be in partnership, male and female, working together to soar to new heights. And to do that, we need women, stepping up into leadership, as we have. And I address in the book some of the external and internal obstacles that remain for women's full equality, but we're stepping up. And this is a guide for how we can direct our energy and our wisdom. So yes, very much for women in partnership with men. It's for people who live in the United States. So it's the country I live in and know best. If you live in the United States, this book will show you what you can do to help create a new America that works for everyone. If you're an elected official or a candidate for office, you can use this book as a guide to governing or a guide to campaigning. And if you live outside the United States, because I know there's a global platform here with our friends from around the world, you can think about the 4 major issues that I address in terms of democracy, climate, health, and economy, and think about how to address those issues in your own country. And by the way, if you decide to do a similar book in your country, I would love for you to do that. And I'm happy to support you to do that. So I think it's really for anyone who cares about the challenging time we lived in, the challenges we're facing right now, and wants to make a difference, but doesn't know how to do it. Like, what can we do that's really going to matter? And I've had so many people over the years ask me, like, they think I'm, they know I'm informed, I'm active, I'm engaged in politics and government. They ask me, Eleanor, what can I do to make a difference? That I'm not president, I'm not a billionaire. What can I do to make a difference? This book is kind of an answer to that question. It lays out kind of a cornucopia of possibility of what you can do. And I don't expect readers to do it all, but I'm showing you this can be done. We can address successfully every one of our major challenges. There's a pathway there. And if each of us just takes one piece of it, that together we can create a new America and a new world that works for everyone.
And Eleanor, why do you think that's so crucial at this point? Why now?
I would say, speaking from the United States point of view, our very democracy is at stake. We have basically 2 years. We're now under assault. The Republicans in the United States have over 300 pieces of legislation that would try to suppress the vote to keep Democrats from voting. And they also have legislation and movements that they're making to try and change and challenge the vote once it's actually cast, to be able to audit it or challenge it with shady means to try and change the results of elections once they're done. So we need to be on top of that, and we need to address that immediately. So that's like a very pressing concern. And in terms of both the US and the world, these challenges of health, look at the pandemic. I mean, we've had almost 600,000 people die in the United States, millions worldwide, and that's the pandemic. There are many other health challenges there. We need to address those. And the climate crisis, of course, is pressing on us, and we must take serious, urgent action to make sure that the planet stays habitable for humans. So we're in and the financial thing, so many people were on edge even before the pandemic. In the United States, the richest country in the world, before the pandemic, 40% of Americans were unable to meet an unexpected expense of $400 in an emergency. 40% of people. The majority of Americans are struggling financially. It's gotten harder for so many people during the pandemic. We still have millions of people who lost jobs in the pandemic and haven't gotten a job back. So every one of these 4 issues that I address in the book are pressing and urgent and need to be addressed now.
Great. And so your book will have some resources that people can dig in further to see what resonates with them and go down that path as well, I would imagine.
Right.
That's great.
That's what the book is kind of a comprehensive blueprint, and it lays out a practical pathway for solving these big problems that we've got, to show that it's possible. Like on the economy, for instance, we have serious issues of people struggling financially. Why? Because so much of the wealth is owned at the top of the pile. The top 1% richest people in the United States own more wealth than 90% of the rest of us. That is staggering, and that's not right. And we need to expand the circle of prosperity. So in the book, I lay out at least 10 ways to expand the circle of poverty. How can we do that? Boom, here's 10 ways. Any one of them could improve the financial security of millions of people. So I think it's helpful to have the blueprint, what the actions are we can take. And I always reference what groups are out there that are carrying forward important work in these areas. and encourage the reader, just pick one topic you're most interested in, pick one group that you want to be connected to, and don't try to do it alone. These are massive challenges. There's no question about it. But they can be done when we work together, and it's important to work together as a team. So yes, it's also a great guide to the resources of who's doing some of the best work on the planet to change things for the better.
I remember that kind of format from your breakthrough solutions, where you were very good at showing in great detail some of the successes. And I also love the criteria that you put. So I'm glad to see that you're carrying through that that approach. Now let's circle back to women. And what do you think is preventing more women from leadership? You know, we want to get rid of that glass ceiling sort of thing. You know, do we have more women in leadership now than we've ever had? I'm not really certain.
Right, exactly. Well, we've made great gains, no doubt about it. And I graduated from Yale in one of the first classes of women there. And at the time, we thought, you know, it was the front edge of the modern women's movement. We figured we'll be the front wave, and then hopefully by the time our daughters grow up, we would have women's equality. But the reality is that 50 years into the modern women's movement, women have made gains, but we're still lagging. There's a real, I call it the leadership gap. And so in almost every area of the top leaders, you'll find that women are about 20 to 25% of the top leaders. If you look in the US Congress for government, it's about 25% of the Congress is now female, which means 75% is still male. If you look globally, it's a similar situation. If you look in law, how many women are partners? It's like, you know, similar thing, 25% women partner. If you look at academia, how many women are presidents of universities? Similar kind of thing, about 25%. So we have made gains. 25% is way more than it was in the 1970s. So we celebrate the growth there, and we still are facing this leadership gap. It should be like twice what it is. We want to have like 50% women and men in top levels whenever possible. So to answer your question, why do we still have that leadership gap?
Right.
And I would say, you mentioned the glass ceiling. There's two glass ceilings. One is the external glass ceiling, and the other is the internal glass ceiling. The external glass ceiling is still challenges of, you know, in every field, women are being paid less than men. And, you know, there's still a belief among a number of decision makers that women are not as good as men in the top positions. So you're facing that. Now that's way down from where it was, but it's still a factor. And I would add external problem, childcare. If you don't have childcare, you know, I think it's something like 80% of women in the United States are mothers. And if you don't have childcare, that's going to hold you back. You know, you can't do as much. You can't rise as much. Harder to work out of the house. It's harder to take more responsibility in your career path when you have a lot of responsibilities still at home. I went up to speak in Iceland a few years ago. They had a big international women's conference. And as you know, the women and the Scandinavian countries consistently come out on top of the scale for women's equality. So I asked the women up there, they were from Norway and Iceland and all over Scandinavia. I said, how did you do it? Like, what's the secret? We want to get there too. And they said, every one of them pointed to childcare, that when they got childcare, it freed them to be able to then get involved more in their career, take on more responsibility, take a job outside the house, and get involved in their community, get involved in politics and government. And that was the key thing. So I think, if you look in 1848, the first women's convention in Seneca Falls, New York, the women early on in the women's movement in the 19th century focused on the right to vote, because they thought if women got the right to vote, that was the trim tab factor. That was the strategic leverage point. When women get the vote, then men have to pay attention to them and what they care about, which was absolutely right. Because who knew it took 70 years to get it, but we got it. So we have the right to vote now. I would say a similar issue right now is for childcare. We need to make sure that there's support, that childcare is available and affordable. And to his credit, President Biden is now working to make that have some government subsidies for childcare. So in terms of external glass ceiling, those are the key points there. But there's also what I refer to the inner glass ceiling, which is kind of inside us. And there is still that sense inside a lot of women, that message that you hear inside that says, I'm not good enough. I'm not able to do that. I'm not qualified enough, whatever. I'm not smart enough. I'm not experienced enough. I'm not old enough. I'm not young enough. And whatever the thing is, that I'm not enough to do that. And that's like an inside voice. A lot of women hear that inner critic. And that's what I call that our inner glass ceiling. And there's certain things you can do to overcome that. And I actually have a whole chapter in the book called Breaking Through Your Inner Glass Ceiling. And it lays out what we can do. And just to give one example, it's to recognize that that messaging that you're hearing is not reality. That message you're hearing is a belief that's floating in your brain, and you can rewire that belief. You can rewire your brain. So every time you hear that, I'm not good enough, then you can just say, thank you for sharing, but I am good enough and I'm going for that job. I'm going for that promotion. I'm going for it, whatever your dream is. And that simple act can absolutely rewire your brain. Just do it consistently. There's more in the book, but that's how we break through the inner glass ceiling.
I think that's great. And I'm glad to hear you have more techniques for that, because, I feel like I had an inner glass ceiling basically all my life, even though I have a PhD, I'm a pilot, I've, published, et cetera, et cetera. And it didn't seem like till I got to my crone age, I'll say, that I really started to get active and say, I have grandchildren. I want, thinking of the next 7 generations.
Yes.
Some of them aren't on the same page with me when it comes to this, but, I just tell myself, someday they'll appreciate this or not. I still have to do what I have to do.
Right, exactly. And it's not just you, Noel. It's virtually every woman I know. And like I said, at Yale, we've got these. I was a student there and involved in the Yale Women Network, which I love. The women, they're so smart and they're doing interesting things. But these are women, they're in the top 1% of smart, successful women with careers and active in the world. Even in that top sphere, these women often have that voice. They're going, I'm not good enough. And that thing about if there's a job posted that's got 10 qualifications required, a woman thinks she needs to have all 10 qualifications to apply. And if a man looks at the same application and goes, oh, I've got 6 out of those 10, this job is made for me. It's like, that actually is shown in a study to be true. So we, hold ourselves to a higher standard and are more self-critical. Not to say, some men have an inner self-critic also. So it's not just women, but I think it's louder, stronger, more frequent in our heads. And you're so right. I mean, a lot of times it's women when they become grandmothers or kind of more experienced, more wise, and you go, hey, wait a minute, I need to take action. Everything that I believe in and care about is now at risk, particularly now. We need the women to really step forward and go, this is crazy. We are destroying life on Earth. We are making life miserable for the billions of people who are poor. And we're destroying the planet and Mother Nature on which all of life depends. We need to change this whole system. And this is what I'm going to take a stand and do. And it's because of you and women like you. I have complete confidence that we're kind of in a birth canal right now between an old world and a new world. And the birth canal, it's very messy, it's very painful, it can be bloody. And with enough of us moving and working for it, we can push through the birth canal and create a new world together that works better for everyone. And
that now you're, I hear Barbara Marx Hubbard being echoed in my head. She always said, our crisis is a birth.
Right.
To look at it, and sometimes people say, well, how can you keep doing this? You just, there's so much against us and blah blah blah. And again, Barbara, and you were a great student and friend of Barbara Marx Hubbard, and I hear there's going to be a breakdown before there's breakthrough. And I believe we're trying to gentle that breakdown, but we do need to break through. And so what do you think some of our major challenges are that we need to address?
Well, I think the first one is about women and about breaking these glass ceilings, both the external one, we have to make sure there's more affordable childcare, and unequal pay is not acceptable. So we need to make some of those changes, and we want to break the inner glass ceiling. And there's different ways of doing that, as I say, laid out in the book. So that's number one. And the reason I put it number one is, we often think of women's rights as another issue among the 100 issues that we have to worry about. But I say it's, in a way, the top issue, because when we address this issue of women being freed to be in more leadership roles, then we can bring the wisdom, the values, the power, the experience, the perspective that women have to offer, and we can unleash like half of humanity to then address all these other issues. So I put that right at the front of the pack. And once we address that, and as we're addressing that, there's 4 other major challenges that I see, and that is around democracy. I'm very concerned about that in the US and around the world, the rise of authoritarianism. That's number 1. Number 2, the climate crisis. If we have to take urgent action, climate action now, to shift from a fossil fuel economy to a clean, green economy, to stop the global warming and the global weirding that's happening. Number 3, dealing with the health issues. It's not just the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Just in our own country here, for example, more than half of Americans have a major health crisis, and that is heart disease, cancer, diabetes. You're talking serious illness. That's the norm in our country. It right. is the norm to be very sick. So we need to address health. And then number 4, which I touched on briefly, is the economy. We want to widen the circle of prosperity so fewer people are struggling financially and more people are included in the circle of prosperity.
Mm. Well, I want to just stop for a moment and say, people saying, she's talking about women. Not all women are on this page, and not all men are not on, and some men are on this page. So,
right.
It's kind of like, but I do feel that as a class, women, particularly Black women, have had, many obstacles. And I think as as more obstacles are mounting, like let's just take our democracy right now, under attack, 400 so bills to limit that. That tells me we're getting somewhere. Because why would they have those bills if we weren't pushing forward and I mean, look at what Stacey Abrams has done, and so many others that I could list. But yeah, but I think women, and in your whole career, I mean, you broke a lot of glass ceilings just through your presence at Yale, being one of the first classes, that graduated with women. So I hear you, but I just want to put that caveat. We need to, but I think you're bringing up very important points, about the healthcare, and I like, about the parental leave. We need more of that, and when you compare that to some of the Scandinavian countries. But let's switch gears here just a little bit. I mentioned it just briefly there. Let's talk a little bit more about democracy, and let's see what strategies do we have there from our wizard?
Yeah, that's great. Well, just to respond to what you said, yeah, I totally agree with you. Not every woman is conscious and moving in a positive direction. And, everyone says, well, what about Margaret Thatcher? She was a woman and she did a lot of damage really to a lot of working people. So yeah, no, of course, not every woman, but there's enough of us that really are awake and on a good track who just need a little bit of guidance. Go, what can I do that's going to matter? Here's what you can do. So boom. And we're in motion. We marched by the millions. We voted in the tens of millions, and we're ready now to defend our families and our country and our planet. And just need to know, what do we need to do it? So this book hopefully will provide some guidance in those directions. And yes, to the men, I love the men who are allies of the women. As you know, Jack and I have been happily married for 35 years, and he's an awesome man. And your husband, Bob, is an awesome man. So we love the men too. It's not instead of or anti the men. We invite the men too, but I think, well, when you look at it, men have been in charge for millennia, and we're kind of done. Like I said, we've been trying to fly with one wing and we're about to crash. We need the women to kind of rise up even more and to say, we're stepping up. We're going to step into more leadership at higher levels, and we're going to move this in a direction that's safer for my children and my grandchildren. I want a planet for my grandchildren to grow up in. I want fewer people hungry and more people freed to explore and develop their gifts, what they came to do, and pursue their dreams, and not be shackled by $1 trillion in student debt, for example, that's holding back a whole generation of students because they're just shackled by $1 trillion in student debt. So that's where we want to get to. So I mentioned that around democracy because it is a great challenge now. Women are more active, women are voting more, and still we have a ways to go. I am deeply concerned about the 2022 elections. It's highly likely the Republicans will regain a majority in the House and the Senate, and then make it nearly impossible for President Joe Biden to do his wonderful program that he's got on all these issues. He's got a great program, but he's going to be blocked by the Republicans in Congress. And so we really want women to really step up at whatever level. So for example, now, if you look at 2016 in that election, what happened was in 2016, about 25% of the people voted for Donald Trump. About 25% plus 3 million voted for Hillary Clinton, and about half the people didn't vote at all. So we've got a lot of room for growth there. And And some of those people, there was work in this now 2020 presidential election to increase that voter turnout. And we had, I believe it was the highest voter turnout in 100 years. But it's still like 65%. So there's still 35% of people who would be eligible to vote that aren't registered or aren't voting. So if you're not voting, if you've been on the sidelines for whatever reason, I'm speaking directly to you. We need you to register. We need you to vote. It's the single most important thing you can do. And it does matter. I can't tell you, working with candidates a lot and elected officials, there's a woman, for example, a school teacher in Virginia ran for the state legislature, Shelley Simons, and she took on this incumbent Republican. And people were like, oh, my vote doesn't matter. That race came out to a total dead heat. They had exactly the same number of votes. If she had had one more vote, she would have been declared the winner. But she didn't have the vote, so they just did a draw out of a jar of who would win. And the Republican won the draw. And so the Republican got to keep his seat. So because that one vote was not cast, this guy got to stay in, and him staying in meant the Republicans in the Virginia House then had a majority and got to control the agenda and control the committees. And it was a huge deal. It took another 2 years. Happy ending to the story. Shelley Simons did run again, and she did win this time. And people began to say, oh, my vote matters after all. But yes, your vote matters. So we need people to do that. If you're already voting, we want to encourage you to get more people engaged, get involved in a campaign, find a candidate you believe in, and help them win. We need you. And don't sit out. They call them the midterms because it's 2 years after the presidential. It's in the middle of the presidential term. We need to treat every election as very important, and including the midterms, which are in 2022, as well as the next presidential election in 2024. And this is our opportunity to really step it up.
Right. And, I live in Tennessee. Bob and I live in Tennessee, and everybody writes it off as a red state, quote, quote, red state. It happens to be more Democrats registered in this state than Republicans.
Really?
The voting turnout in this state is I think we're number 47 lowest in the nation.
I did not know.
So it's kind of crazy. As soon as we got here, we got involved with League of Women Voters. They allow men.
Right.
And we were poll workers because we wanted to see firsthand. We didn't want to listen to rumors about this fraud stuff. I was so impressed. But getting those people to the polls is, we have to stay awake, particularly at this time, because if we lose that,
You're so right. And as you're saying that, I'm so grateful you and Bob are in Tennessee, because that's the key, is to turn those voters out. And you mentioned Stacey Abrams earlier. That is exactly what Stacey Abrams did. She was a state senator in Georgia. For people who haven't heard of her yet, you will. She's an amazing young woman. And she had a plan to get those Democratic voters out, and worked it for years to increase voter turnout. A decade, 10 years she worked. This was her plan. And that is how the Democrats won, not one, but 2 US Senate seats in Georgia, which gives the Democrats 50-50 now in the US Senate. And it's a majority because we have the Vice President Kamala Harris is the tiebreaker in the Senate. But yes, it was getting those voters out. So there's hope for Tennessee with you and Bob and the League of Women Voters. Like, whatever Stacey Abrams did, do that.
Well, actually, one of her protege is from Tennessee, and she said she wants to do in Tennessee what Stacey did in Georgia.
Where do I send the check?
Out. Don't
I
count
want
us
to
out.
know where to send the check. That is so fantastic.
I'll get you her info.
Great.
Well, I know we have a lot of other topics to talk about here. I want to talk about the challenges in the economy, climate, health. So I've kind of taken a little bit more of your time, but go ahead and give us some info in those areas. I'm just going to let you go.
Yeah. Well, I'll keep it really brief. And, obviously there's a whole book to go into this, which is a forthcoming book, just so our listeners know it. I'm just finishing writing it now, and it will be out later this year. But say on climate, we know that global warming is being caused by the emission of greenhouse gases, which are things like carbon and methane that get emitted when fossil fuels are burned. That means oil, gas, coal. When those are burned, then we emit these greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and then that leads to global warming, hotter temperatures. We've got right now, as we're talking, there is a national heat wave.
Yes.
And everybody is sweltering. It's just unheard of this early in the year. So that's what's happening. And also the global weirding, I think, is what someone called it, Friedman there from the New York Times, I think, which is just very strange weather, more intense and more frequent hurricanes, more intense and more frequent flooding, more intense and more frequent droughts, the wildfires, just all kinds of strange weather. So we know it's from these greenhouse gas emissions. So what do we need to do? We need to stop those greenhouse gas emissions. And how do we do that? We shift from a fossil fuel economy, shift away from oil, gas, and coal towards a clean green economy, which is more renewable energy, like the solar power, renewable always every day from the sun, or the wind power. And by the way, solar and wind technology has advanced so rapidly, it's now cheaper to use solar power and use wind power than it is to use the fossil fuels. So on a straight economics basis, we win. That's what we should be doing. That's what cities should be doing. That's where we need to go.
Can I jump in here for just a second? I just attended a seminar that World Beyond War put on. And, when you have the Paris climate and you have all these other things where they say they're going to do this, they never include their militaries. And our military is one of the biggest polluters on this planet. And of course, our military outsizes the next 8 put together. So, we don't ever think about war and the environment, but that's something that they would like to keep untracked. Let's talk about your cars. Let's talk about your recycling. Let's talk about what you, the consumer, can do. Well, I would like to say, as somebody who's a peacenik, let's not have the wars. Let's not have those. You just think of how much fuel it takes to have them, and the incendiaries and other things that they use. So that's hot off my hot button from going to this seminar. If you want to learn more about that, worldbeyondwar.org is a fabulous organization. So yes, I'm sorry to interrupt your flow.
No, war is bad for children and other living things. So let's find other ways of resolving differences. And yes, the military is a major source of pollution. But having said that, I will say the military has kind of gotten on this and has been working aggressively over the past many years for itself to shift into more renewable energy. And there was, this may be too detailed, but there was an advisor to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He identified as perhaps the greatest threat to US security was the climate crisis, because it would mean that there'll be more drought, more bad weather conditions that would lead to less food. It would mean less water, which means more conflict, more people fighting for food, more people fighting for water, millions of environmental refugees who can no longer live where they live because the seas are rising and the weather is bad and there's drought. So he identified this years ago as the top security concern for the United States, and they started to really address this issue. So, not to say they don't have more to go, of course they do, but at least they're aware of it and they're taking some action to kind of clean up their act. So President Biden has a great plan. I would say, we want to implement what he's got, and anything that moves us more quickly into the clean, green economy is what we want to do. So that's kind of climate action. And again, there's a whole chapter, a whole plan, climate action plan. What do we do? It's laid out how we do it. It's in
I look
there.
forward to reading this book. Hurry up and finish it.
Yeah, I know. And you mentioned about
Talking about health and
health. Now we know, not, in the US, we've got the NOM is a serious, chronic, perhaps life-threatening illness, diabetes, heart disease, cancer. So we need to change what we're doing. The approach to health and healthcare, we need to change it because it's not working. And part of it is, for the past 100 years plus, has been a major focus in Western medicine on drugs and surgery, on pharmaceuticals and operations. And we need to expand our repertoire of how we approach getting healthy and staying healthy for preventive care, and to include other kinds of treatments that are more gentle and sometimes more effective. And, things like whatever it be with your nutrition, number one, eating healthy stuff as opposed to a lot of the junky food that's out there. The connection between diet and health is profound, but is that taught in our medical schools? Not very much. And part of why the medical schools are financed by the pharmaceuticals. So I remember I was asked to dinner once by a professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. And when we sat down to dinner, he said, Eleanor, the reason I wanted to meet with you is, he said, I know I have been trained and I am training other doctors that when a patient is sick, we either try to kill it with a drug or cut it out with surgery. And that's not good enough for me. I know there are other things we could be doing. Would you tell me what you know about other methods of healing? And I shared with him, there's acupuncture, there's herbal medicines, which have been used for thousands of years. There's a lot of them. So what I would like to do in our healthcare system is shift it from a disease treatment system, which is what we have now. Treat the disease after you've got it, and then you're going after it with the drugs and surgery, and shift to a health maintenance approach where you keep people healthier, you teach people, including doctors and nurses, the importance of healthy food and what is healthy food and what's unhealthy food, and include some of the modalities like acupuncture and moxibustion, and there's a simple way we can do it. I want those other modalities to also be covered by insurance. Right now, people are seeking those treatments. I forget the exact, something like $20 billion a year that people are paying out of pocket because the traditional model of the Western medicine is not helping them. And they'd rather try some of these other approaches to see if it can help them with their cancer or whatever else they're dealing with. And but they're paying out of pocket, and not everyone can afford that. So there's a simple method that I recommend in the book, and it's called comparative effectiveness, that we do more research on these other methodologies, and what is shown to be most effective is what is used. Now, if that turns out to be a statin drug, like for example, if you've got clogged arteries right now, there's 30 different drugs you can choose from to try and clear your arteries so you don't have a heart attack from it. First of all, which of those 30 is actually shown to be more effective? We should find out and say, if, here's the top 3, these are the ones that if you prescribe a drug, it should be one of these 3. Second of all, there's a whole other approach, like Dr. Dean Orders, a medical doctor, wrote a book called Undo It, where he says, not only can you prevent some of these conditions like the heart disease and clogged arteries, you can even reverse it once you have it by doing 4 things. 1 is eat healthy, 2 is exercise, 3 is have social interaction, and 4 is bring more peace into your life through meditation or walk in nature. If you do those 4 things, no matter what your health issue is, or pretty much across the board, those 4 things are going to help, and they're not going to hurt you. Whereas if you get the wrong drug or the wrong surgery, you could die.
That's one of the major killers in this country is the inappropriate administration of drugs.
Yeah, and there's actually a word for it. It's called the Atrogenesis, where the treatment is worse than the disease. And I'm not a doctor, and I'm not telling people what to do about your health situation. What I'm saying is taking big picture look at our healthcare system. We have an over-reliance on drugs and surgery, in part because of the money that's made by the pharmaceuticals and by the people who make the machines and the whole surgery system. We need to widen the lens, and we need to do an analysis. What of these various treatments, including herbal medicine, including the methodologies being recommended by Dr. Dean Ornish, what of those are really effective? And then include those as what the doctors are prescribing to their patients, and include those in what's being covered by healthcare. If you did those 2 things, expand the modalities and use the comparative effectiveness to determine which treatments were being assigned to people given their health condition, you would dramatically transform the entire healthcare system.
Right. We actually have a panel during World Unity Week all about veganism. And that's also very powerful. Another diet approach been shown to be very effective. But I just want to, when Marianne Williamson was on the big platform with all those other Democratic candidates, and they're talking about healthcare. And so here she is on the end, this tiny petite, going like, wait a second, why don't we talk about the underlying issue here? And, it's not just how do we pay for this stuff? How do we really examine what it is? Exactly what you're saying, Eleanor. And I know you were one of her policy advisors, so I'm quite sure that you had something to do with her. She was going like, well, let's look at, how we're taking care of ourselves. And
yeah, I was her top policy advisor for the 2020 presidential campaign, and she's been a friend for 25 years. So I have tremendous admiration for Marianne Williamson for her courage and her brilliance, and the focus that we had on that campaign in every area was to not just look at effect, but to look more deeply into what is the cause. So in every area, if you look at cause, you're going to really solve the problem, and not just, tinker with reform at the top, but fundamental change that can improve the situation. And that was definitely the case. Like, it's the conversation in that presidential campaign was all around, how do we pay for healthcare? Do we pay for it as a public option? Do we pay for it as a national paid healthcare system? Which is an important conversation, but it's not the whole conversation. We wanted to raise the issue why are so many people getting sick? This is wrong.
Bravo.
Let's look at this and let's change that so we have less demand. And that's why if you take the approach that I'm talking about, you have less of a demand on the healthcare system, and the money you save from treating all those very serious diseases that come, you can use to cover the other modalities for treatment.
Right. Well, I think we're about out of time, Eleanor, but this has really been so informative. And I want people to know how to get a hold of you. And are you going to do pre-orders for your book? Is that possible? Or
I will do pre-orders. I haven't set it up yet, but I intend to do that. I'm trying to stay very focused right now because I'm so close to the finish line. But it feels a little bit like, Sisyphus pushing I think I'm about done, and then I find some other book or other idea. But I really want to get this done. So yes, it will be available at my website, as you mentioned, eleanorlecain.com, and it will be available for Amazon when it's ready.
awesome. Well, I want to thank you so much for the brilliance you brought to this conversation, and the brilliance that you brought to all the women and lawmakers and diplomats and candidates. I can't thank you enough. She's like I'm not going to say the wizard behind the curtain, but she's like, well, maybe she just brings so much. And one of the, we don't realize, but you're a mover and a shaker. And I really appreciate our friendship over the years and how much I have learned from you. And we're just blessed to have this conversation. So thank you so much, Eleanor.
Thank you so much, Noel. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you, and thank you for your friendship, and thank you for your great work in the world.